What if one day you looked up and realized your world had quietly emptied? Friendships that you had once counted on had drifted away. Family calls suddenly feel harder and less frequent. Invitations for coffee are no longer coming. At first, you tell yourself it's just life. People grow apart, schedules get busy. But inside, something feels wrong. Something feels smaller, tighter. You can't put your finger on when it started. Only that each time you reach for connection, there was a reason not to. A comment, a doubt, a silence that made you question whether it was even worth the effort. And then one day you noticed you have no friends or family you can turn to anymore. You look back and wonder, I used to see them all the time. I used to have people around me. I used to feel supported. Now it's been years, and the only voice left in my life is my abusers. When you try to understand how that happened, the answer feels like it must be you. You're the one who stopped calling. You're the one who cancelled. You're the one who let it all slip. You carry the shame of isolation as though you built it yourself. But then the small memories surface, a quiet voice in your shoulder pointing out who was good for you, who was using you, and who never really cared. The soft commentary that turned you against the people who once held you up. And the insidious reality sets in. When you finally realize what happened, there is no one left to reach for. No one but the very person who created the silence. That's the trap of isolation. It convinces you that no one else can give you comfort and support except for the one who's causing you pain. That's the topic of today's episode of the Blueprint of Family Violence Against Men, which is isolation. It's one of the core tactics of entrapment in abusive relationships because it robs you of the very lifelines that could have helped you out of the darkness. We'll first talk about what isolation really is and why it's one of the most dangerous tactics an abuser can use. Then we'll break down into 5 key ways an abuser tricks you into isolation. The first is poisoning a perception, when you are slowly turned against the people that you once trusted. Second is guilt based disconnection, when reaching out to others is reframed as selfish or neglectful. Third is no go zones, when certain people are made off limits through loyalty tests. Fourth is wounded victim narrative, when your partner reframes family and friends as aggressors that you must abandon to prove your love to the abuser. And then fifth is direct obstruction, when every attempt to connect with others is interrupted by sudden needs, crises, or demands from the abuser. After that, we'll explore how isolation lands uniquely for men, the shame, the silence, and why it's so hard to name or even talk about. Then we'll share some guidance on how you can begin to rebuild a safe network of connections, even when the pressure of abuse is high. And for those of you who are new here, this is Stand Again, a lived experience platform for male victims of family violence. Abuse is not limited to one gender, but this channel focuses on the male perspective because it's so often ignored or misunderstood. If this content helps you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice might just help another man find his. So, what is isolation in abusive dynamics? Isolation is one of the most frightening parts of abuse because it dismantles your lifelines quietly. It isn't about being locked in a room or explicitly forbidden from seeing people, though that does sometimes happen. It is about slowly being cut away from everyone else who might give you perspective, encouragement, or support until the only presence left in your life is your abuser. From their side, the goal is simple. If they can make you doubt your friends, distance yourself from family, and abandon the people who once cared for you, then they remove any competition for influence. They make sure their version of events, their criticisms, and their needs are the only ones you hear. Without witnesses, without counterbalance, their control deepens. From your side, it doesn't feel like manipulation at first. You believe you are making your own choices. You convince yourself you are pruning unhealthy friendships. You tell yourself you are prioritizing your relationship, being loyal, or being emotionally mature. Each time you take a step back, you think it is your idea. That is the genius of this tactic. The abuser doesn't have to shut the door, they only have to convince you to close that door yourself. The result is devastating. You look up one day and realize you haven't spoken to a close friend in months, maybe even years. Family gatherings feel awkward because you've been absent for so long. The invitations stop coming, your phone falls silent, and you sit there wondering, what happened to me? I used to have people around me. I used to belong somewhere. Now all I have is this one relationship. When you try to put your finger on it, the answer you land on is brutal. Me, I'm the reason. I'm the one who stopped calling. I'm the one who didn't show up. I'm the one who cut them off. And if you raise this with your abuser, that's exactly what they will throw back at you. I never told you to stop calling them. That was your choice. And technically, they are right. You did do it, but only because they planted the doubts, the guilt, the conditions, and the conflict that made every connection feel unsafe. That gaslighting is one of the cruelest parts of isolation. You are not only left alone, you are left believing you chose it, which means when the loneliness becomes unbearable, you blame yourself for creating it. And then comes the hardest part, trying to reconnect. By the time isolation has run its course, shame sets in. You feel embarrassed for disappearing. You imagine friends mocking you or rejecting you if you reach back out. You believe family will see you as weak or pathetic. The truth is, most of them would welcome you back, but isolation conditions you to believe you don't deserve that welcome. So you stay quiet, you remain cut off, and even after the relationship ends, rebuilding feels like climbing a mountain you're no longer strong enough to face. That is what isolation really is. It is the theft of your external world, disguised as your own decision making. It convinces you to dismantle your support networks with your own hands, to carry the shame of having done it, and to live inside a cage built not of locked walls but of silence, absence, self blame. Let's now take a look at 5 of the most common ways an abuser convinces you to isolate yourself from your support networks. The first one is one of the most subtle and actually one of the most effective. That's poisoning of perception. Poisoning of perception reshapes the way you see the people who care about you. It presents from your abuser as if they are caring for you. They give you small observations and quiet questions, and you hear lines like, "You always seem flat after you talk to him," or "She never asks how you're going," or "I get a strange feeling from that friend of yours." Each of these remarks lands softly. Each one asks you to look again at your friend in a different light. That's what poisoning of perception is all about. It's designed to take small, insignificant aspects of your friends and family and recast them as reasons you should not connect with them. It reshapes your perceptions. It taints happy memories. It makes you feel like spending time with this person will actually cause you harm because they are supposedly toxic in ways you could never see and only your abuser can. And if you do question your abuser, you're told you're naive. You don't get it. You're blind to how toxic your friend really is. The abuser insists they are the only ones looking out for you. And without their insight, you would be exploited. And because you love them, you listen, you trust them. Slowly, your behavior changes. You start replaying conversations in your head, scanning for signs that you missed. A neutral comment from a friend suddenly feels loaded. A missed text becomes proof of disinterest. You arrive at catch ups feeling tense, carrying the abuser's warnings like a filter over the entire experience. And when you do get home, you feel you need to explain to your abuser how it all went to justify why you're still keeping this person in your life. And when you do start to cut these people out, you convince yourself that this is maturity, that you're finally protecting your energy, that you're cutting out negativity. So you delay replies to them, you cancel plans with them, you keep calls short. There's even relief when a catch up falls through because it avoids the debrief from your abuser waiting at home. Step by step, you adjust your behavior, not because you want to, but because the lens you see others through has been shifted. This tactic works because it leans on your strengths like conscience, humility, loyalty. When a partner frames a concern as protection, you have to take it seriously. You consider it carefully, as a good man would. That willingness to reflect becomes the very reason you pull back from the people who once grounded you. There are tells. You notice yourself preparing an explanation before seeing someone you have known for years. You glance at your partner's face after a call from them to see if you're in trouble. And you hear the exact phrases of your abuser echo in your head when your friend messages you. They only call when they want something. And you keep score on who initiates contact the most and use those numbers as justification to step back. You begin labeling long standing relationships as toxic without a clear event that ever earned the label. The sequence is predictable. Doubt is planted about one person who matters to you. You start watching that person closely, looking for confirmation. You relax when contact from that person doesn't happen. First, the depth in the relationship fades, then the frequency. The story forms that you simply grew apart. By the time you realize how much distance has been created, the person who could have reality checked what's happening no longer has access to you. The cost is far bigger than a missed coffee. You lose a mirror, someone who reflects you back without an agenda. You lose witnesses who can say, "You are not yourself lately." You lose routes out of the house that don't require permission or explanation. And because there was no explicit bands to point at, you carry the shame for the distance as if it was entirely your idea. The next is guilt based disconnection. Guilt based disconnection is a form of isolation where your external connections are reframed as betrayals to the abuser. The abuser doesn't forbid your friendship outright. Instead, they make you feel that every moment spent with others comes at their expense. Times with friends, a call with family, or even small gestures of kindness towards others are not treated as normal acts of connection. They're cast as proof that you don't value your partner enough. This tactic works because it shifts the meaning of your behavior. Going out with friends is no longer just catching up, it's neglect. Helping a family member is no longer generosity, it's disloyalty. Even resting after giving energy to others can be framed as evidence that you give your best self away, leaving nothing for them. In time, you stop seeing your relationships as life giving and start experiencing them as guilt inducing. The more you care about someone else, the more you feel you're failing at home. That's what guilt based disconnection really is, a steady redefinition of loyalty. Instead of love being measured by connection, it's measured by restriction. The less time you spend with others, the more committed you told you are to the relationship. The more you shrink your world, the safer your relationship is framed to be. And because this is never an outright spoken rule, you don't see the walls being built. You just feel the pressure to make better choices until your entire social life has been thinned down to almost nothing. It shows up in comments that sound wounded rather than controlling. You might hear lines like, "I wish I was as important to you as your friends are," or "You always have energy for your friends, but never for me," or "Go on then, I'll be fine, I always am." On the surface, these phrases sound like sadness, but underneath, they are hooks of guilt. They leave you feeling selfish for wanting a coffee with a mate or for spending an evening with your family. You come home from simple outings carrying shame, not joy. And after enough of these encounters, you begin cancelling plans before they even start. The manipulation deepens when kindness itself is reframed. If you put effort into celebrating a friend, you're told you never do the same for your partner. If you help a family member, you're told you must care more about them than about me at home. No matter what you do, the message repeats. Your loyalty is in question. The lived impact of this is heavy. You start to monitor yourself. Before sending a message, you hesitate. Will this cause trouble? Before saying yes to a catch up, you rehearse how you'll explain it. Even while you're out, you feel a shadow in the back of your mind, the silent ledger being written at home, measuring how much of you they've had to share. By the time you get back, you've already braced for the emotional hangover. What makes guilt based disconnection so effective is that it never looks like a command. You can't point to a moment where you were banned from seeing friends. Instead, you find yourself stepping back little by little, carrying the shame as though the withdrawal was your choice. And because you appear to be the one creating the distance, you also carry the blame. That is how this tactic steals your support system. Not through threats, not through ultimatums, but by making you feel like being loved by others is proof that you don't love your partner enough. The next is no go zones. No go zones are one of the clearest isolation tactics within an abusive dynamic. This is when certain people in your life are declared off limits by the abuser. Not because of something that that person has ever done to you, but because your abuser frames their very presence as incompatible with the relationship. It becomes a loyalty test. If you stay connected to that friend of yours or family member, it means you are disloyal to the abuser. If you want the relationship to survive, you are expected to cut that friend or family member out. The reason the abuser does this is typically quite simple. These people are a threat to the abuser's control. They may be the ones who actually see through the facade, the ones who notice the changes in you, the ones who would challenge the narrative the abuser plays out. They may also be the people you are closest to, like family or friends, with a stronger bond than the abuser can compete with. By removing them, the abuser ensures there are no rival voices to theirs. The only perspective left is the abuser's perspective. The way it plays out is rarely framed as, I forbid you from seeing them. Instead, it arrives as moral language, boundary setting, or ultimatums about respect. You'll hear phrases like, I can't be someone who's still friends with a person like that. Or, if you care about me, you won't see him again. Or, I'm not telling you what to do, but if you keep them in your life, don't expect me to be okay with it. These are not requests, they are conditions. The person is labeled incompatible with love, and you are forced to choose. What it feels like in the moment is confusion. You want to defend the person, but you also want to defend the relationship. You may convince yourself that letting go of one connection is a small price to pay for peace at home. You tell yourself you are prioritizing your partner and your relationship. You tell yourself it's maturity, commitment, and compromise. But deep down, it still feels wrong because you know nothing happened to deserve it. The impact is devastating. One by one, the people who could have been lifelines vanish from your world. You carry the shame of being the one who pulled away, even though the decision was forced on you. And when the tactic has done its work, you look around and realize the only person left standing is the one who demanded the cuts in the first place. This is what no go zones are, a deliberate pruning of your life, dressed up as loyalty, until your only loyalty left is to your abuser. Next is the wounded victim narrative. The wounded victim narrative is one of the more emotionally manipulative forms of isolation. It works by recasting your family or friends as aggressors, not against you, but against your partner. Small comments, neutral interactions, or even completely imagined slights are rewritten as proof that your family and friends are cruel or unsafe towards your partner. Your partner presents themselves as the one who has been harmed by them. the one who is constantly disrespected, and the one that you should be protecting from your family and friends. Their pain becomes the moral weight you're asked to carry, and soon staying connected to others is reframed to be betrayal against your partner. The power of this tactic lies in how the offenses are revealed. They are almost never raised in the moment when you could see them clearly and judge for yourself. At the event, everything looks fine polite conversation, laughter, maybe even warmth. But later, once you are alone, you are told how hurt they were. Did you hear the way he spoke to me like I was stupid? Or, she was mocking me the whole night. You saw it. Don't pretend you didn't. Or, I felt humiliated in front of everyone and you just sat there and did nothing. And you replay the night in your head and you can't find the cruelty they are describing. But the intensity of their pain makes you question yourself. Maybe you did miss it. Maybe you weren't paying enough attention. You feel guilty for not noticing, guilty for not stepping in, guilty for failing to defend them. From there, the pressure typically grows. You're urged to be the one who intervenes, to confront your family, to challenge your friends. You become this messenger delivering anger on their behalf. And because the offenses are so vague, you look unreasonable to the very people when you are confronting them. The relationships start to fracture, not because of direct conflict, but because you've been pushed to choose sides and you're confronting your family and friends over imagined slights. What makes the wounded victim narrative so dangerous is how convincingly it casts the abuser as the injured party. You're trained to see them as fragile, mistreated, alone, and to believe that protecting them means sacrificing everyone else. In time, your partner becomes the only person you can safely stand beside, at least in your mind. That is the wounded victim narrative, a tactic that turns empathy into a weapon, convincing you that the people who love you are the enemy and that standing by your abuser is the only way to prove your loyalty. Finally, there is direct obstruction. Direct obstruction is when an abuser interferes with your ability to stay connected, not with words, but with disruptions. Every time you try to reach out to a family member or friend, something suddenly happens. A crisis emerges, a need arises, a demand for your attention cuts across the moment you were about to spend with someone else. At first, it looks like coincidence. You're about to call a friend and she asks for help with something urgent. You plan to meet family, and suddenly there's an illness or a household drama or a meltdown with the kids that needs you right now. You try to leave the house and you stop with a line like, "So, you're abandoning me when I need you the most." These interruptions feel reasonable in isolation. After all, who wouldn't stay at home when their partner is sick? Who wouldn't respond to a crisis? But the pattern only emerges when you look at the timing. Every time you try to connect with others, there's a resistance or a disruption. Every attempt to reach out costs you peace at home. The effect is exhausting. You learn that even if you do make plans, they will probably fall apart. You stop accepting invitations because you'll be met with guilt or chaos. Slowly, without ever being told not to, you kind of give up. The obstacle course becomes too hard to run. The cruelty of this tactic lies in its deniability. To outsiders, and even to you, it can look like life just got busy, or like your partner is having a tough time. If you try to name it, you risk sounding heartless. What? You don't care when she's sick? Or you think I made that stress up? This manipulation hides behind circumstance because the outcome is deliberate. Fewer connections, fewer witnesses, fewer routes to safety. That is direct obstruction, the steady sabotage of your attempts to connect until isolation feels easier than fighting for your own relationships. Men are trained early to carry the weight quietly. The message is simple for us: handle it. When isolation begins, that conditioning masks the danger. A shrinking circle feels like discipline. A quiet phone feels like focus. You tell yourself you're streamlining life, cutting drama, keeping the household steady. The reality is very different. Your world is thinning, and the first instinct is to tighten your jaw and keep going. That instinct makes isolation hard to spot and even harder to admit. Stoicism turns the dial even further. You call it resilience, and it does get you through the hard days. It also dulls the signal when something is wrong. You stop checking in with people who would notice the change in you. You stop reaching out when you need support. You start believing that asking for company creates work for others. The habit looks noble and it feels familiar, and it slowly teaches your nervous system that solitude is safer than connection. Then the public story kicks in. Men who speak about loneliness are mocked. Jokes, memes, throwaway lines on podcasts. Each one says the same thing: isolation in men is a punchline. Institutions rarely treat men's social health as urgent. That climate shapes your choices. You swallow the need to talk. You delete a half written message before sending it. You assume no one would take it seriously and you act accordingly. Silence begins to look like maturity because the culture rewards you for keeping silent. Rebuilding is another wall. Adult men don't form new friendships easily. Schedules are tight, social groups are set, and pride gets in the way. Isolation adds a layer of shame. You remember that you were the one who cancelled, the one who didn't call back, the one who said no again and again. Reaching out feels like returning after disappearing, and the mind fills that gap with stories. They've moved on, I'm going to look needy, it's been too long. Those stories hold you at the door and keep you from knocking. There is also the private confusion that sits under all of this. You know you cut people off, and that fact lands like guilt. You try to explain why it happened, and the words don't come. You can't point to a single rule or a single argument. You just remember a thousand small decisions that reduced your world until there was no one left to reality check any of it. That is what isolation does to men. It aligns with our training. It wears the mask of strength. It feeds on public indifference, and it makes reconnection feel like a risk rather than a return. So, how does a man come back from isolation and begin to rebuild healthy networks? Well, it starts by first recognizing that connection is not one size fits all. What you need depends on where you are in your journey. If you're still inside the abuse, your priority is safety. This is not the stage for a big social circle. It's the stage for one person you can trust. Maybe that's a therapist or a trauma informed coach like myself. Maybe it's your brother. Maybe it's a mate who will just sit with you without judgment. You need one safe person at least who can hold the line until you are ready for more. If you're separated but still carrying the weight of court battles, false accusations, or financial strain, then choose tactical connections. Find people who understand male family violence and will not dismiss your reality. This might mean, in Australia, Men's Shed, which is a father's support group, or even just one other man who has walked a similar path to you. At this stage, the wrong company can be dangerous. The friend who says, "Forget it all, let's go get pissed," might sound like relief, but it can pull you into decisions that make things harder. Alcohol and terrible situations are not a great mix. What you need in this stage is steady ground, not escape routes. As you move into recovery, the focus can widen. Hobbies are one of the best doors back into yourself. a sport you enjoy, a project that brings your hands to life, a skill you've always wanted to learn. These are more than pastimes, they're bridges back to your old identity or your new one. They also open up communities of people who value the same things, giving you connection without performance or pretense. But there's something even more important than who you meet. It's how you define what healthy looks like for you now. You need to ask yourself, do I need people who make me feel safe? Do I need a support network to help me navigate the system? Do I need friends who can bring lightness and laughter back into my life? The answer will change with time, as it should. What matters is that you are deliberate, that you choose people who meet your needs instead of slipping back into relationships that drain you or are toxic. And remember, reconnecting does not always mean rekindling old ties. Some family members may come back if you reach back out. Some friendships will survive the silence. Your abuser will also likely have tainted your view of that individual, but that might not be what they think of you. If they do come back, that's great, fantastic. If they don't see it as failure. It's just reality. You can also build new connections with strangers through groups and classes and community spaces. Healing doesn't ask you to go backwards, it asks you to step forward into relationships that honor the man you are becoming. That's the pathway out of isolation. Start narrow, build tactical supports, widen through hobbies and shared interests, and always keep the question close. Does this connection strengthen me or does it pull me further away from myself? If you've felt the walls closing in, if you've looked around and wondered, where did everybody go? Know this, it was not weakness. It wasn't because you were unworthy of connection, you were being isolated. It was a tactic, a trap. The good news is the very same way you were led into it is the same way out, step by step, one conversation, one coffee, one safe ally at a time. Reconnection is not about filling every chair around you. It's about building a table where the right people have a right to sit. People who steady you, people who see you, people who remind you that you are not alone. And as you rebuild those lifelines, the grip of isolation begins to loosen. You start to feel choice again, presence again, belonging again. That's how you stand again. Not by carrying it all alone, but by letting the right voices back in. Voices that don't control you, but remind you of who you are. So take it one step at a time, send one message, make one call, walk into one group. Each small act is not just a reconnection, it's resistance to the abuser's trap. And it's proof you are not alone. This is Stand Again, lived experience platform for male survivors of family violence. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice might just help another man find his. If you're looking for one on one support, you can book coaching with a member of the Stand Again team. Simply visit standagain.com.au, where you will also find grounded information on surviving and recovering from family violence as a man. As always, remember that no matter how many times you've been knocked down, you can stand again.